And we're back with another episode of Why Y'all Working.
What's up, family?
I'm one of your hosts, Alaire Jameson.
I'm Michael Agusanya.
Been a great day. We're in a new location. Michael, tell me where we're at.
Tell him bring out the whole ocean.
The Blue Ocean. It's all about that entrepreneurship. Starlink is sending up satellites. I think they sent up over 1,000 at this point. And they are allowing people anywhere in the world to access what they call affordable internet from anywhere, really just letting you access the system from any remote location. I feel like it's most useful for people and or entrepreneurs who are working maybe in the Midwest who don't necessarily have access to much like bandwidth and infrastructure as far as like fiber optics and cable. Not to say that it doesn't exist, but like using satellite internet versus using internet dial-up speed, not necessarily saying that you're still in dial-up speed, but if you're not in a urban area, your internet speeds are trash. If you do not have, whatever the most popular service provider is in that area, in that region, whether it be Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile, whatever. Again, I don't think Sprint exists anymore, but you get my point. T-Mobile, AT&T, they're still out there. So depending on which one you have, is depending on how much service you actually have in a particular location. I just switched over from Verizon to T-Mobile. That was the best decision for me, right? Verizon doesn't really have much connections outside of the U.S. as far as partnerships with other service providers, but AT&T, not AT&T, but T-Mobile does. So the reason why I bring that up is because you can get satellite internet or internet through your phone, right, your cellular, overseas if you were to have T-Mobile or AT&T or something like that. Verizon attempts to do that, but they charge you a buku amount of money in order to just find and search for signal the entire time while you're abroad. Trust me, I'm speaking from first-hand experience. While I was in the UK, it was useless. My phone was absolutely useless unless I had Wi-Fi. So, to say that to say, it would have been great for me to have something like Starlink. Starlink, you have to pay, I think it's 150 buy-in for like the minimum the panel. I'm gonna have to look that up and.
Is that a fixed cost or like monthly?
There's a fixed cost and then there's a monthly cost. So it's like you buy the hardware, that's the fixed cost, and then you pay the monthly reoccurring fee for the bandwidth and the internet access and the connection. But it's not the reason why I didn't get it for my apartment when I moved in is because it wasn't up to snuff yet. Like it wouldn't support gaming and the latencies that it needs to support that. So if you can't really support any type of gaming capacity, I know that it's not strong enough yet for a lot of people to be on it and actually, stream video, online, play game or whatever, communicate. So that's like kind of like the main thing there. Starlight's best use case is like they have a roaming one or a stationary one. So you can buy like a stationary hardware where you can just set it up at the house, make sure it has, no unobstructed view of the sky where it needs to be placed. It could be placed on a deck, on top of the house, et cetera, et cetera. But again, the downside is that if you don't get much sunlight or if it's cloud cover, you may have issues with spotty connection. Again, you're supposed to have an unobstructed view of the sky, but sometimes weather happens, could be a storm outside. I don't know if sun plays a role in whether or not your satellite dish receives connection, but I do know that storms also play a role in disrupting connection sometimes, depending on what debris is in the air. So, yeah, it's a great use case for the product. And again, if you're a remote nomad or a nomad worker, the roaming Starlink may be better for you if you do a lot of work on the road. You're in a Sprinter van or.
It's not fixed. It's not like a dish.
Yeah, so the roaming dish is like it's kind of like imagine like a satellite roaming top of your car. I'm gonna pull up the picture too. Yeah, so maybe so I'm doing like too many different things.
We're gonna have a picture for y'all to see. Oh, honestly, our TikTok that we posted earlier got like 800 views. Someone that reached out. I'm gonna remember your name, but when I remember your name, I'll let you know. Okay. we gonna fuck with you.
Okay.
So shout out to you.
Shout out.
We're gonna keep it going. Now that I got Premiere Pro, so for y'all who don't know, we started while y'all working with the idea of it being a tech radio show using AMP, which we should hop back on. Did like what 5, 6 episodes, had Zeka Len on there, and then we found out that our episodes don't actually save. You can't save any recordings of the
That's the
conversations.
one flaw of that platform, I would say, besides not being able to do a whole host of things. And you have a reach within Amazon, but it's not like Amazon is connected to a behemoth like TikTok, right? Because there's no social media platform attached to Amazon that is going to allow us to grow in the ways that I feel like we want to. Granted, I don't know if there's going to be competitions in the future or different things in our niche, like dealing with entrepreneurship, personal finance, growth, personal development, professional development, right? That Amazon wants to produce. I follow their film and their release schedule. So like I'm aware of it. I know that they're doing a lot more with that. Their budgets are getting a little bit bigger. They're getting more contracts and such. But I'm just curious because AMP is just an anomaly, so radio is a dying breed. Like radio turned into what it already was, which is podcasts, which is solely audio, right? Or audio and video. So yeah, I feel that. Oh, coming back to real quick, Squarespace is acquiring. So I'm going to read you the email. Squarespace recently announced that it entered into an agreement to purchase all domain name registrations and related customer accounts from Google Domains.
Dang.
So,
That's huge.
it is. Right now it says my domain will continue to operate and be managed by Google until it is time to move to Squarespace. And that won't happen until the transaction closes, until way after the transaction closes and the migration process begins, which will likely take place over the next 2 months. So all customers will be moved to Squarespace domains in the coming months. And that means that Squarespace domains is an independent domain from the registrar service provided by Squarespace. So it seems like it's another company underneath the Squarespace umbrella. It also seems like Google is divesting. It could be good and or bad. Again, everybody's focused on AI right now and space and whatever's making money. So I'm guessing maybe websites is not a lucrative, like hosting websites is not a lucrative service for them. It may be their least money maker, right? I feel like when companies sell a portion of their business off, it's because it's not making as much money as they would like it to. Similar to Starbucks, when Starbucks bought Teavana for $1 billion and some change, and then decided to shut it down because their margins weren't big enough, right? I think they had 40% margins, and Starbucks wanted it to be 70. Doesn't make sense for a loose leaf tea business, so I could see why it didn't go anywhere, but I feel like they didn't try hard enough to expand the business and do all the things that they could have done to expand that IP. But needless to say, when we look at this from a cloud company perspective, right? Squarespace is still going to utilize the Google Cloud DNS infrastructure. So DNS is not changing during the migration, at least for right now. And then again, the one thing that everybody needs to notice when these things happen, when these acquisitions happen, is that we're looking at, it's still subject to regulatory approval, right? So whether or not a judge says that Google is okay to sell this to Squarespace, and Squarespace is not going to become a conglomerate as a result of the sale, that's like what we're talking about here. Because again, the government only steps in anytime that a corporation owns too much in too many categories or in too many spaces. Like Amazon, for example, is one of those companies that they're looking at potentially splitting up if they get too big. Now, Jeff Bezos is a little too smart, so he probably put that plan in place to make sure that they keep all those different businesses siloed, so that way it doesn't present a problem for Amazon. However, if Amazon just decides to make too much freaking money, they're going to be split up by the federal government with many different businesses. You'll have a transportation business, you'll have logistics business, you'll have a software business, you'll have, there'll be a whole bunch of marketplace business, right? So there'll be different aspects of the business that won't be under the same umbrella. And unfortunately that happens, not often, but it does happen. Speaking of which, Disney is also divesting some of their investments. I think ESPN is up for sale.
Really?
So
After firing like half their staff.
yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, writers on strike. There's a lot of things going on. Shout out to SAG-AFTRA and everybody that are doing good work out there. We feel for you. We understand, and we hope that we can provide any support. So just let us know how we can help on the East Coast. We know we have actors here in Baltimore. Another great event is coming up for artists and creatives called Artscape. I think that's this weekend. This is the weekend of the 24th. So depending on when this comes out, you guys may or may not see this, but when you do, just be on the lookout for that. I think we have Ari Lennox coming through, so that's great. I don't know who.
It was her.
Her was
she had to cancel.
Her had to cancel. I'm glad Ari Lennox is from this area, from DMV. I don't really care about anybody else. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
It's gonna be her first time in Baltimore, like shit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's gonna be over time in Baltimore. She's from the area, man. Let's be real here. I'm pretty sure she's done shows in Baltimore before. I have not gone seen them, but I wish I could have been there because I'm going to like the Alma Piano pool party vibe on Saturday. So
Where's my right?
Hey, my cousin hit me up. It's in Virginia. It's in Sterling.
Oh yeah, good.
I would have told you to pull up with me, but yeah. So yeah. But back on topic. So just even talking about conglomerates and businesses like that, understanding where we are right now in the world is kind of interesting. I posted a lot of different things on my story today. And on my Instagram story today. One of them being the fact that, I don't know if you haven't heard, India landed on the moon, or an Indian space mission successfully landed on the moon. I want to say like about a month or a couple weeks after the Russians tried and failed to do that. The Russian government tried and failed to do that on their own, to land on the southern tip of the moon. So when we look at that, it's also interesting because it only cost the country of India 75 million, the government of India, 75 million to get the rocket and the artifact on the moon.
Staff included.
Yeah, I'm guessing so, right? So, like, it's just like NASA, for example. Like, all countries supposedly work together in conjunction as far as like the International Space Station is concerned, right? Despite the fact that I feel like the international space race is starting up again. Now, my question is like, I posted this on my story, is why do you think that we haven't necessarily paid attention to space until now, when there has been way more than just one or two companies on the NASDAQ 100? There's hundreds of companies, right? Hundreds of thousands of companies that are worth well over 75 plus mil, right? That we're talking about here that we may not even know about, but there are some on the NASDAQ, right? So what do you feel about, like, what do you think about that? Like, is it interesting to you as it is interesting to me that we haven't necessarily tackled space until now, even though more companies have been worth more than 75 mil, right? If people just not cared about space until the government's like, oh, aliens are real, even though clearly they have been real since the 1920s and before then. So my thought is if the technology has always been there, where are we going with this, and where do you see us going?
Yeah, that's a great question. The thing is with space travel is like every 4 to 6 years, periodically it becomes like a bigger conversation. I can still remember 2017 when people were talking about colonizing Mars and taking their first commercial trips to space, and how that list already got backloaded. And Lord knows, like, the people who probably spent $10,000, $20,000, once they saw that submarine get turned into a Coke can, it was like, all right, let me just not.
Not a Coke can. We should have drank Pepsi.
I think it's like sociology. I want to call it obsession. The space travel that happens globally every so often comes from a fear of like, what do we currently have? So we saw climate change, real support to the people in Maui and Hawaii. We're seeing alien presence being like officially announced, even again
acknowledged, right? Area 51 has been a thing. We all know about it and joke about it, but the fact that this might actually be factual, like some of our anime or cartoon dreams where they go into like Dexter's laboratory and there's aliens locked up and like, that's right. That's scary.
Yeah. And side note, if anyone watching it actually did the Storm Area 51, please comment because we need to get you on this podcast to figure out what was going on and what you consumed to want to go all the way to Vegas and try.
I want space travel. If I could be anything, space intergalactic travel and like helping space explore and stuff like that. I want to be peaceful, you know. But if I need to protect myself, I will.
Okay.
But I don't know how I'm going to do that in space.
You gonna shoot an alien?
I didn't say I was going to use a gun. If they have space guns and space weapons, for all I know, I might unlock my sixth sense to become a Jedi.
Yeah.
I
gonna
just
take off the mask.
yeah, I'm gonna be like Darth Vader. Like, yeah, like that's just kind of like what I'm thinking. Like, I feel like there's a lot. Like, so even then, like, barring the space conversation, I think that there's a lot to even think about there, right? Because it's like, how long before humans actually go to space regularly? My thought process is with that is, if we're trying to make commercially viable space travel a thing, and rockets are the only way that we can get there, but we also have to endure the same G-force that a fighter pilot has to endure when they're going close to, I think, the speed of sound or speed of light, whatever it is, whatever the clicks and be talking about, but I don't think they go that fast actually. But when we talk about the force and the exertion on the body that is placed when you're going at that speed, it's going to be interesting to see and know whether or not we actually have the ability to time travel at this point. Because when you go through space, you're essentially warping through time, if I'm understanding that correctly, because space is infinite and it's an infinite void, but in order to move, I really don't know how things are, because like they don't really crash, right? You get up there and you kind of stay up there. It doesn't necessarily come down unless it's pulled down by gravity and or orbit of another planet.
There's like conversations I get taller after spending extended times there, and they end up being younger, so they age less, literally in space.
Interesting.
So that's one thing. If I wasn't doing what I was doing, I would have studied like and becoming
like astrology and stuff.
Astronaut.
Oh, okay. Like not astrology, but like physics and all that stuff. Not really studying the stars, but space and like. Okay. No, that's really dope, because even just having that conversation, there's an entrepreneur that is attempting to reverse his life by spending over $2 million. I think that if you saw today, Diary of a CEO, he just posted. I watch this podcast a lot. Well, Diary of a CEO podcast.
British guy.
Yeah.
Come on the episode.
Well, I want to be on his episode eventually at some point once I do, finish these big things that we got going on. But like, even thinking about that, I don't know, it's very complicated. A lot of people have adverse thoughts about living longer than what we think is possible, or like at least what our perception of what is shown to us is possible, right? Because every single day we hear about, here's the oldest black restaurant is in Arkansas and it's over 100 years old. That's what we know of, right? That's just because people haven't come out and been like, yo, like we're here. I mean, social media is still kind of new to the rest of the world. So when we think about that, there's a lot more things that we don't know. And when I say that, I also need to mention that there's also a lot more people in this world than we think and believe that may be living longer than 100 years old. And realistically, it shouldn't be that hard for us to do so, I feel, within the proper conditions, like with the proper conditions around us, with the proper environment around us. Now, in order to achieve that, this entrepreneur is going through numerous amounts of medical tests and examinations done by professionals, of course. Obviously, he's paying them. He makes millions of dollars. But the way in which he's doing that involves utilizing the bodily fluids, blood, and transfusions between himself, his father, and his son. All consenting individuals. However, that still turns some people off from that, because they're like, well, why do we need to experiment with our bodies? And you get into the science of big pharma, and again, right, all these conglomerates that are making these drugs and are synthesizing these, whether it be diseases or cures, and we're not putting them out there, right? So there may be some way for us to feasibly live as long as possible. And if this guy is living and has his body in a state where it is acknowledged, like data showcases that his body is 18 years old, even if his mind and his actual age is like 40, 50 something.
Oh, is that that point?
Yes.
I remember hearing about the journey and the things that he was doing. And my first thought is like, oh, if you're able to um, kind of prevent aging at a certain point, maybe we're talking 5, 10 years, there's a chance it might be accelerated. After a certain point, you eat a cheeseburger, now you're 98 years old.
Right.
But the fact that he's over half, he sliced kind of his age, both from like a DNA and just biological side, and more than half. That's impressive.
Yeah, no, so like that's kind of like the big things. I know we've been all over the place between space and that. Like I feel like, particularly for me, both of those places are interesting. I think that cellular regeneration is one of the places that I particularly like. When I get my millions, I'm going to be putting money into that. I think stem cell research is probably where I'm going to be putting my money into, um, with the focus with the focus being on cell regeneration or like organ regeneration. Because if we can amplify that in our bodies without necessarily using up all of our cells like viability and life force, we can essentially help the bodies repair themselves from any injury possible. Now, I'm not saying that if you get shot in the heart, you won't die on impact, right? But there will be maybe a way for us to save, first responders on site if they get their arm blown off or they suffer severe burns, and we're able to like revitalize, rejuvenate their bones or skin or any organs. That's kind of like my thing there. I don't know what you think about that.
I mean, that would be huge, especially bringing it back to space travel. Think about colonization. There might be 2 doctors, 3 doctors. There might be 1 person who understands construction. And again, bringing the idea of like what it means to live connected with like what is the human experience. I think the human experience is just growing in terms of what we can and can't do. I do believe that. Like I'm looking at Jaden Smith, and I feel like, on top of him being multimillionaire, we talked about it on the last podcast. I think he's preparing himself and his mental and his body to still live for at least 150 years, and I think that's possible. I don't know, like his whole demeanor. The way he approaches music, art. He'll like drop an album, 2 albums, 3 albums, and then just kind of ghost off the side of the world. And his training routine, his regimen, like what he was putting into his body and how he was working out, it's proven that like, okay, this guy is like on some like 2% body fat, trying to like get to a point where he could work forever. So when I think about stem cell research, a lot of it had to do with food, which seemed disgusting. I'm not eating the stem cell patty, like the stem cell burger. I think you saw the first chicken. They just did that, like a chicken breast. We made it from a test tube. Came out like in the past 2 weeks. So that's.
I don't know how I feel about that. I feel okay. So
either it just came out or it just got FDA approved.
I mean, either way, I believe it. The reason is I used to work for a firm called Early Charm here in Baltimore.
Shout out Ken Malone.
Shout out Ken Malone. Congrats on the new contract, the new facilities for manufacturing. But the reason why I mentioned them is because there's one company within their portfolio that was either working with or creating food like vegan fish, and it was interesting. And this may not be them, and maybe some other startup. And if it is, forgive me. But there is a startup that is creating fish out of like vegan proteins or something like that, like some organic way that doesn't actually involve fish, and turning that into sushi. I don't get that, right? Because it's like, well, now the animal's not involved, so is it more humane? Like it's that a humane way for somebody to get in their fish proteins if it can be created cells, right, or replicated. I don't know how that food system works.
Is it like because right now, in order to make like vegan fish, you're putting a lot into it. I know there's like a seaweed factor. So basically, making vegan fish, just because I eat vegan food occasionally, is pretty difficult.
Okay.
So maybe they're creating, like you said, a protein, a cell that's like organically occurring in nature, to make that process. Maybe they're layering the soy with that material in order to make it more fish-like because it's not a fish, but it's still vegan, but
Yeah.
it's also like a living biological thing, which is interesting.
Big facts, big facts. Let me see here. I just put up the article on the entrepreneur, Brian Johnson, 45-year-old, and he's at least 5 years younger than his age, so they say. But yeah, the issue is that okay. So the issue is with me right now in data and science is you have all of these supplements that you need to take, and he has a exercise regimen, as you said that Smith also has, right? Trying to live like forever. Knowing that exercise is really the true way for humans to live long. Um, how do you feel about the fitness industry as a whole right now, knowing that there are a lot of entrepreneurs and creatives being born out of that industry, right? Showcasing different things, promoting health, wellness, but also what's even more interesting is that a lot of them that have become entrepreneurs as a result of their like their following, right, from social media platforms like YouTube, Twitch, TikTok, um, Instagram, YouTube, whatever the like, right? They have these platforms where they built these followings, and eventually they've turned these followings into orders and customers of their business. And this business is not necessarily a need out of their niche; it's more so a passion project that they've always wanted to do.
Mhm.
Prime example, one of them being Max Tuning, right? Max Tuning is an entrepreneur, YouTuber, creator that I've been following for quite a while, since high school, middle school, high school, honestly. Um, and he started up this company, candy company called Sour Strips. He has now a podcast called Don't Be Sour as well, doing a lot of good things, interviewing a lot of my famous YouTube OGs as well. Um, but I find that very interesting because he's been very successful off of the success of his fans and the platform that he's created on YouTube. And you know, the as a result of that, he pours all his money into his business now in Target, HEB, and a whole host of other stores alongside some other things that he's involved in, right? He has some pre-workout brands, stuff like that, as well as his own apparel brand called Everboard. So when I look at this, I see it's very interesting because none of those things, with the exception of Everboard, has anything to do with fitness, right? You could argue and say that okay, well, having some sugar right before you work out helps your workout. It does, right? Simple sugars, fast sugars get into your bloodstream, allow your muscles to utilize that to push weight and do all these different things. But it's really interesting for me to see like for us it's different as far as our entrepreneurial paths, right? We have to find the niche and a need. They don't necessarily need to do so. I think the need more so in the community for them was putting out the content. And now that they put out the content, their audience is there. Another example is you may not have heard Alpha League. Alpha League, I would say, is the American equivalent to Gymshark in terms of uh, creator to creator, like supporter to fan to customer growth. Like if you look at that and look at their model of how they built both of those brands, Ben Francis is the CEO of Gymshark, recently billionaire, recently minted UK billionaire, youngest, one of the youngest, I think. And then on top of that, the business itself is a multi-billion-dollar business in sportswear and apparel. So that his business is directly relevant and related to his niche and his support for his community. However, in the beginning, right, it was grassroots, right? I don't know necessarily if there was a need for clothing. It was more so a passion project that they had that just so happened to become more valuable and important to the community around them. And became a sort of unifier in a sense, right? Because now Gymshark is literally everywhere. You've heard about it. I mean, I'm assuming, right?
Sure.
So this is that they just opened their store.
They're venturing into like, I mean, they have even like yoga mats. Like they have.
Yeah, they
exercise.
literally have everything. So I think that for me, understanding where Gymshark could potentially go, right, knowing that it's $1 billion business now, it's like, okay, are they trying to go after Adidas? Are they trying to become the next Nike world, right? both of which those companies are huge and massive. So do they take a step into doing shoe footwear, right? Because to me, that would be the natural progression unless their sole focus is solely on fitness and apparel wear, and then
Yeah, Under
athleisure.
Armour.
Yeah, like athleisure and stuff like that. But remember, Under Armour is still in a lot of other things too, right? They're also covering all the sports sector. So maybe that's what's next for Gymshark, right? When we're thinking about that from an entrepreneurial perspective, maybe what's next for them is just doubling down on sponsorships, um, in particular, right? To bring up something that's going on right now, these no deals, these no marketing deals with all the young college athletes that are coming out. That
Shout out Angel Reese, Bayou Barbie. She's in Baltimore as we speak.
Yes, sir. Congrats to that. Congrats to Sha'Carri Richardson also for winning her race, and Noah Lyles for also being the badass that he is and an anime extraordinaire. So shout out to them. But the reason why I bring them up is because they're not necessarily nil deals, but Angel is, right? So she's one of the top nil deals right now. Bronny, hope he's good. But he also had one of the top no deals of his class, if not the highest
8.5
no
million.
valuation. Right. So both of them would be way valuable for something like Gymshark to come after, right? When we're looking at these replications, if you saw, you told me to watch that movie, Jordan's movie.
Big Clone Tyrone.
No, well, you did tell me to watch the Clone Tyrell. I did watch some of it, but maybe you didn't tell me to watch that. But it was if you watch the Jordan movie with
Jordan Peele.
no Michael Jordan's
Last Dance.
his origin movie, the one about the shoe and the one about the company of Nike.
Oh yeah,
Like
yeah,
the origin.
yeah.
I call it
Jam.
Space Jam. No. All right. Bro.
Air. Yeah.
It might be Air, but it's Jordan, the Jordan movie. I call it the Jordan movie, but it's not the Jordan movie.
Bro, you're definitely talking about Space Jam.
There's no way. Is that the name of the movie? No.
Space Jam 11, Space Jam the movie.
No.
Bugs Bunny was in that thing.
Air. Where's the movie? You're right. Air. Just Air. Air's the movie. I didn't know, but I watched it. I thought it was really interesting. Again, like watching any business movie without really knowing that it's a business movie and thinking that it's just about sports, but then like really get into the weeds of like how it actually came all together. It was really interesting for me. So that allowed me to see how they went after all of the college athletes spending that 200K on just LeBron, not LeBron, but on just Michael Jordan himself. Excuse me. It just made it interesting because we as entrepreneurs make that decision all the time, right? We say, fuck, like we might have to drop all of our eggs in this one basket. Are they going to be hit it out the park, or is this going to turn into something that I'm going to regret and have to shut up the company? So, yeah, I see this. I see Gymshark potentially getting into that realm. I hope they do. I hope Alpha Lee does. Yeah, like I think that it's very interesting to see that these health and fitness entrepreneurs, health and wellness entrepreneurs that own these gyms that are doing great things, are getting into these spaces where they can really dominate the creator space and then also make waves for individuals that are coming after them. I see a lot of innovation in that space. I don't see as much innovation in our spaces, if that makes sense.